Imani Muhammad needs no introduction. She has been a very good friend of mine for a really long time. We've known each other now at this point, like half of our lives. She is the visionary of youth and Books Not Bars OR. And if it was not for her, her leadership, her vision, her passion, her commitment to literacy, to children, to our community, to uplifting Black and Brown voices, y'all wouldn't even know me today. So Miss Imani is going to introduce some things about our work and what we do. And then after that, I'll come back and introduce Miss Nikki to y'all.
Yes, and the other panelists as well. We have tag team all day. First, yes. So Youth Organized United to Help is our organization, which was founded in 2010. I currently sit as the board chair, and I will own the title of a visionary. That's it. That's as far as I'll go with that. Miss Paula and I, we co-founded Books Not Bars OR, which really has been truly the inspiration of our programmatic work. And so when we're talking about programs, we're talking about disrupting the school to prison pipeline and dismantling the school to prison pipeline by challenging existing structures. It's through Books Not Bars is how we're doing that. So one of the things that we look at is we kind of have a three-prong approach. So we know the parent advocacy is key, right? So all the information that we've talked about today is really about empowering parents and the guardians of children to know how to advocate on their child's behalf, right? So we talked about learning disabilities or learning styles, right? That's what I heard someone say, changing my language, learning styles. Making sure that parents know how to advocate that in the existing public school sector or even private schools. So having the right language, knowing how to say what my child needs. So we help out with parent advocacy. The second tier, of course, is training educators. So, we learned, and we all probably know that the demographic of who teaches and who's standing in front of our children are 79, some statistics say 80% white females. And so if that is the case, which we know the real solution is changing the teacher pipeline, right? So getting more representation in front of the children that look like the children that they're serving. But alongside of that, especially when you're in a city like Portland, where our population is 6% or whatever, some days 7%, representation may be difficult. So knowing that, how do we make sure that teachers are checking their own biases, checking their own upbringing and racial biases to be able to actually see my child as a valuable human being, right? See my child as an equal to the peers in the classroom. So our second approach is training educators, and that, you all know, that can be a lot of work. But training educators around implicit and explicit bias. And then the third approach, is really providing the resources, right? Providing the resources not only to educators and parents, but young people, making sure that young people are aware of really everything that we just learned today. Young people need to understand that there is a system that does not want them to be successful, right? Especially Black and Brown. So when they're aware of the same barriers and the same issues that you and I can rattle off our tongue, when youth are aware of that, then they take more ownership in their narrative and they take more ownership in their own experience, and they know that they are valuable and that they are more, right? And they are, whole human beings. So that's really the three-prong approach of Books Not Bars OR. There's all types of stuff that spring from those three categories that I just shared. But if you want to know more about us, I'll put our information in the chat so that we can keep the conversation going. But that's us, that's youth, and that's Books Not Bars. Go ahead, Miss Paula.
Thank you, Miss Imani. Okay, I am going to just introduce the next panel. We have 3 people that are going to be sitting on our next panel, just so I'm not taking up any more of the time, because we have about an hour to wrap this up.
No quiero tomar tiempo en esto, ¿verdad? Pero...
So first we have Miss Nikki Brown, our literacy advocate. Nikki Brown is a Black literacy advocate for children and best known as Portland's first African-American clown, affectionately called Nikki Brown Clown. Nikki has dedicated 10 years of her career hosting cultural specific story hours target to Black families and their children. After we hear from Miss Nikki, you're going to hear from Miss Zalika. Ms. Zeleka is a parent to 3 fabulous children, one of whom has dyslexia. She has been in elementary education as a parent, teacher, or administrator for the past 26 years. And then we're going to hear from Mr. Kareem Weaver, who is a former administrator and teacher and is currently a member of the Oakland NAACP committee, education committee, and is the leader of the Full and Complete Reading is a Universal mandate called FULCRUM. I like that. That's very creative. All right, you guys, the floor is yours. Nikki, Miss Nikki, we're going to start with you. You're muted.
See, I'm used to being a clown. That was not a trick. Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here because I find it very fitting that it's my birth anniversary because in 1973, I was born to a Black woman in Virginia. Please do not tell Portlanders that. To a dyslexic Black woman. Okay. She dropped out in 8th grade because of everything that we heard here earlier. Being frustrated, schools in the deep, deep South weren't for her. And because of colorism, she's a very dark, dark woman. She wasn't getting the services that she needed. Although her school was integrated, light-skinned Black women and children were being served. And I don't believe at that time that she was in school that they were even testing for dyslexia. So it pretty much landed her a job. She brought me to Portland, Oregon when I was 6 months old. So I did make it to Portland in that summer. But she's a factory worker and she stayed a factory worker because one of the things that made it a little bit easier for her was being able to read numbers. But what she did know is that she gave me the power of literacy. I remember the first time that I opened the door back then when the mailman actually came to your door and brought me my big Mickey Mouse or Disney books that actually had the seams in them. And I absolutely fell in love with that. And she knew that the best thing for me was to get me immersed in literacy. She didn't have all the tools that we learned here today, but I was probably one of the first children in North Portland to have a mini library. I used to lend out my books on my porch on Interstate and Lombard when the number 5 used to go by. So I have had just an innate love for literacy, and the North Portland branch library has always been my haven. I could get away from there. I didn't grow up with my mom reading to me. And so I started to learn a little bit more about that. But having a parent of dyslexia is very difficult and challenging. Because of her frustration, it led to over disciplining of me, pushing me through school, but she couldn't read any of my notes that came home. So I learned how to sign and forge my mother's signature at an early age. But fast forwarding to the work that I did in the community, I've realized that there is a huge stigma, and working for Multnomah County originally, not for the library, which I would have liked. I could never get into that, but I started working for an outreach. And I noticed folks didn't want to come up to my booth because of the way that I looked. There's a lot of stigma. No one wants to be at a county booth if you're at Good in that Hood, or, you're just enjoying yourself. You don't want to be at the Juneteenth. You don't want to be in the Juneteenth being soon at a government thing. So I started to ask my boss, could I show up as a character? And I noticed that folks started to flock to me as the character. And so that made it very clear to me that there was a stigma. There was a stigma of being able to talk to each other about reading or services. So partnering up with Black Parent Initiative, myself and those founders there, we decided to create Black Literacy Night. And they built it around my character, which I didn't know until just recently this year. And then they partnered up with other folks to give away books, and specifically, and we got a huge pushback from Portland Public Schools because they were like, well, can't you call it multicultural night? Can't you call it something else? I mean, everybody wanted to evade the Black word. So, and it was like, no, going back to how I opened up and talking about my mother, there is a specific intention. There's a specific intention in teaching Black children how to read. And I have spent a lot of time studying that. A lot of people may see me at in person or virtually. It looks like I'm effortlessly, but behind the scenes, what folks don't know about me is I'm an early childhood major in college. I actually studied the history of children's books and children's literacy, which children's literacy originally wasn't made for Black children, and it wasn't made for children. Okay, so I'm gonna say that again. It wasn't made for children. So if you look into the stories that were originally delivered to my house, we'll pick on Disney, those stories were not made for me. Snow White. Let's start with that. Problematic. Y'all see that? And there's a witch delivering an evil apple, not to mention that she's asking who's the fairest of all. And that's what I was consuming. Okay, so I learned specifically those things in college, but I didn't really, well, not that Snow White was evil for me, but that Snow White was made for adults. So children's literature and cartoons in particularly, they were made, and they always told these tall tales that children were evil, that if you don't listen to adults, you'll get eaten or killed. It's just really wicked and deep. But I just noticed that as I got older and I became a parent, and now that I'm a grandmother, those stories don't include folks that look like me. So then also the pictures are outdated. Okay, I was helping my foster son here, and I realized that there was a picture of a garden tool. Garden tool. Okay, that garden tool, the name of that garden tool is very inappropriate by today's terms. So anyways, I'll wrap it up. But the reason why I find that my job is very important, and I started on my birthday in, decided to volunteer my time at a historically Black coffee shop. It was no longer that Black coffee shop known as Reflections in Portland, Oregon. It had been taken over by an owner, and I decided to ask that owner, could I start to host Black story times? And I just thought it was innocent. It was going to be a gift from me. And I always have had a tradition to give through literacy on my birthday, similar to how I'm spending time with you all. So I started to do that, and I just thought I was going to do it just like for that month, a month of March. And it just went overtime. So I showed up with Black books that looked like the children. I showed up with music. So I've taken R&B or historically Black music and infused it with Black books, and just made it where I noticed that the children were like, oh, brown clown, you look like me. That looks like me in the book. And I was able to show them images that they recognize from their community, from their homes, their church, their mosque. And so therefore I've been invited from all areas of Black folks who are interested in having their children be interested in reading. So I thank you guys for your time. I don't know how much time, but I just wanted to kind of, if I'm a little bit more comfortable with a green wig and makeup on. So, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Miss Nikki. Miss Zalika. Hi. Want to tell us who you are and what you do, and give us some.
Indeed, some thoughts. So my name is Zalika Gardner, and I, as was mentioned before, am a parent first and foremost of 3 amazing children. My middle daughter is dyslexic, so I have a deep appreciation for everything that's been taught about today. I feel really honored that I even get to be on this panel right now with all of the experts that have been in the room. I've appreciated and learned from each one of you. And I thought, in my current role, I'm a co-founder at KairosPDX, which is a charter school in Portland, Oregon. We're K-5. We're in our 8th year now as a school. We're about 220 children. And we, like all of you, have been about really trying to eliminate white supremacy from education. And what does that actually look like? And what are the positive and proactive steps we can do to make that happen and close those achievement and opportunity gaps that we hear too much about? Certainly literacy is a piece of that. And as I've been listening all day, I've been gathering nuggets and thinking about, okay, so how has Kairos responded to that? How has Kairos responded to that? What has that looked like in my real lived experience? I consider myself an educator researcher with a goal of not just serving really incredibly well the 220 children that we have at Kairos, but also being a part of system change that impacts all across our country. So I'll share a few things that have come up for me as I've been listening to the wisdom that is in the room and in this space. Thinking about, well, and first of all, I also have to acknowledge that we certainly at Kairos are not the first people in our city to take on, nor are we the only people to be taking on this journey. And I want to at least give a shout out to some of the people, as we heard, that we stand on the backs of, like the Black Education Center and those trailblazing educators in our city, like self-enhancement and those trailblazing educators in our city that were unafraid of saying, we are going to be about Black children. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to do that unapologetically, and we're going to do that with joy. And that is what we've sort of taken on those pieces and those wisdom, and we continue in that legacy to have that focus. So we also are really aware of this idea of children navigating Blackness in a white world and in education that is white on so many levels, from the design to the implementation to the execution, they are navigating whiteness. And so some of the ways that we've been trying to be aware and interrupt and reflect on how we do that differently. We are, as a school, located in the historically Black neighborhood of Portland. We got to think about Sankofa and thinking about our history and how it is that we got here. We're going to be intentional about that. So Kairos has fought to be in this neighborhood where we are. We fought to bring the most robust intellectual mentoring to each and every one of our students that for a long time was shipped out to the suburbs and other places through the movement of resources. We're going to just move them out to these places, and we stand directly opposed to that. Nope. Our kids actually need to be given more rather than less. So really making sure that that robustness is offered to each and every one of our students, that we really consider the whole child socially, emotionally, academically, and culturally, that all of those are not in a hierarchy, but they actually exist as a foundation that needs to all exist together in order to really see our children thrive. And that we're purposeful about positive Black identity, that it's not accidental, that it's not once a year during particular months or whatever the case may be, that it's not apologetic or quiet or any of those things, that it's just loud and proud. Like that working toward positive Black identity needs to be a part of a child's education experience. And that's through their images, it's through the narrative that surrounds them, it's through their own self-talk and the things that we're giving them about themselves, that is a core piece of what it means to be in education against white supremacy. I really take a lot of inspiration from the speakers that we've heard around school culture and centering love. Like, what does it mean to actually really care for the entire child? Well, you have to center a feeling of belonging, that they are loved and that they are worthy of that love, time, energy, attention, and robustness in their school experience. At Kairos, we talk a lot about Kairos love, and we, over time, have defined it in a couple ways. One of them being, I care enough about you to do my own work so that I do not shame or blame or try and control you with fear. The do my own work, hugely important here. We've talked a lot throughout this day about the educators that are in front of our children. And our stance is that we want to care for those educators, but we want to have high expectations of those educators, that they're doing their own work to unlearn the biases that continue to perpetuate if we don't interrupt. So we care for children by doing our own work to make sure that we don't shame, blame, or produce fear in them. We also are committed to children's long-term success. That's what love is, right? Like, it's not like I love you in this moment when you're in the room with me, but I'm actually committed to see you thrive. I love all of who you are. I feel honored that I get to be a part of your journey, and I'm committed to seeing you thrive in the long term, right? So that means partnering alongside children. It helps us to get out of the deficit thinking because it's not about whether it's the child's fault to blame or the teacher's fault to blame or the family's fault to blame. This is a false conversation that leads us down roads that then create division. It's actually all of us together to be about this child's success, whatever that takes, whatever that means and whatever that takes. That's what we're in for when we think about Kairos love. So it's the kind of love that makes you feel warm and fuzzy and belong, but it's the kind of love that also calls you into your best self, holds you to high expectations and reminds you of your brilliance. And no one wants to be defined by their, most, shall we say, unexpected moment, right? And we don't want to do that to our children either. We don't want to do it to our adults either. We want to always be seen in our brilliant best. And so we commit to doing that for our young people. Part of that, and especially as we think about learning and literacy, is gaining some comfort with the normalization of productive struggle. We saw multiple times that there's only about 5% of kids that learn to read just because they woke up that morning. I have certainly seen those children that they get it like breathing. I've seen them, but unfortunately in schools, we've normalized that that's what smart looks like. And we have to dial that all the way back to really reframe what it means to be, a smart child or a bright child or an intellectual child or any of those things that then become a piece of our inner story as educators. And believe me, children feel that. Children are brilliant and they feel exactly what our inner story is about them. So we have to normalize productive struggle. Yep, some things are hard. Bring that, excellent, that's perfect, because we like challenge and we want to make sure that our children also are surrounded by that narrative. We have to also be willing to provide feedback, and this has been my experience not just as an educator but as a parent. Turns out students know if they're having a hard time. It is not a secret to them. The issue comes in when they're trying to make meaning of it, absence of a person that is empowering them in their life to make meaning that does not end in things like I'm dumb, I'm slow, I'm not enough, right? If we leave children to make meaning, unfortunately, we all know this and experience this in our own lives in various ways, that's where children will tend to go. So we have to be willing to give that actual feedback of oh, this looks hard. Does this feel hard? And we saw several stories of that, of people who came alongside a learner and loved them enough to speak truth into what they were experiencing and then offered them partnership, not judgment and not labels, but actual partnership. I am now committing to you that I am in this with you. It is going to be hard, and you and I are enough to get through that hard part. That's again a piece of the adults being comfortable with productive struggle, because sometimes that means we have to relearn the way we do things. Sometimes it means we have to embrace some humility about our practices. And one of the mantras that we try and hold at Kairos is best practice is as best practice does, which means we actually have to center what is happening for the children. That's how we'll know what is going to be our best practice for this. And that does require humility. We've heard that all throughout the day too. There's ways that you're taught and you become committed to those ways. I've been in education long enough to have experienced that as well. But if we're committed to the way as opposed to committed to the child and the outcomes, we can very rapidly get off track in terms of making sure that we are providing an equitable experience for our young people. And we also have to love them enough to be honest when we've made mistakes and we're going to make a shift. And we have to be committed to that journey for the long haul. We also, have to be committed to, to connecting our young people to their intellectual heritage. We heard often when we think about history that our young people have been systematically disenfranchised from their intellectual history. It has become a thing that has been literally torn from them, and it's been replaced by a whole bunch of things. Many of them were meant for their demise. So we as educators have the opportunity to reconnect that intellectual heritage so that reading and that writing and the loving of text and the loving of language and loving of having that intellectual discourse does not somehow become disconnected to the intellectual heritage that we have for generations been people who were interested in intellectual pursuits. So that very intentional connection of a child's racial heritage and a child's intellectual heritage, I believe, is also an opportunity to move towards solutions. And then we think about our educators. So if we're going to be care and commitment is going to be our stance toward children, what I've learned, and this is my education administrator stance here, is that I have to be equally committed to the care and commitment to our teachers and our educators. And what does that really look like? To care for them without blame and without shame and without resorting to fear to get behavior change? What does it look like to commit to their long-term success and partnering with them as they learn new and important ways to innovate? We've heard a lot about training. So one of the things we've learned at Kairos is we have to be committed to training on two fronts. And we have to like hold a schedule in our calendar that is committed to that training, not just to speak it, but to hold the time to make meaning that the teachers can do so. Both on the cultural front around bias, we cannot move away from that. That is still a very active part of dismantling white supremacy in education. And we have to be looking at, okay, how are we actually executing our curriculum? What are we actually doing? And giving teachers time to talk through those things. We have to create a collaborative culture where we're all learners. We tend to create in education silos where people are experts. And then there's difficulty in crossing those barriers to be able to say, oh, wait, I need to learn something new. Oh, I've been doing this wrong for a while. Let me make a change. Like those kinds of structures need to be a part of schools so that we are just all learners on this journey together. What that looked like at Kairos was I certainly came in with a perspective, and our leadership structure is such that it's collaborative and we invite teacher leadership into that. And I had a teacher, a fabulous teacher, come to me and say, you know, hey, I have some ideas about what we can do with our literacy program. And I had to be in a space of, okay, let me hear that. as opposed to being in a space of, I already told you what it is that I want you to do, right? Which when we think about the power that administrators and districts and superintendents have, a piece of that power has to be the shared power of the people who are actually doing the real work. And it has to be around centering, okay, what are you really seeing with children? And what that has looked at, like at Kairos, is this teacher who came in and said, okay, I think we need to make a shift because, as we've been talking about, I'm seeing foundational skills that are not being met for too many of our students. What is paramount to us at Kairos is we stop immediately at that point and pay attention. Like, okay, we don't exist so we can perpetuate this. We exist so we can change that and interrupt this. What needs to happen? What do we need to do? And where do we need to provide resources? And so because I was a parent of a child with dyslexia, we started to look into, well, what are the curriculums that work for young people who are struggling through dyslexia? And then we just made some decisions about, okay, if it is good and if it is powerful for our children who bring some vulnerabilities in this area, then it's going to be good and it's going to be powerful for everyone, not just the few families who know how to get the tutors, not just the few families who know how to go at this resource, of which I was one. I'm an educator. I knew when I saw my daughter at 3 and 4 not able to rhyme consistently, I was like, right? There's something here, but not all of our families should have to do that in order to get their children's needs met. So we brought in the curriculum that is often utilized for children with dyslexia, and this amazing and brilliant educator, shout out to Miss Lisa, developed a whole system and trained all of our educators in this system so that we can meet all of our students where they are in their actual classrooms, in their daily existence. We also partnered with wonderful organizations that can offer one-on-one in the early years tutoring, and we looked very carefully for ones that are partnering with people of color, because we want to see people of color in classrooms supporting our young people. So that was sort of some of what it looked like to hold, as I heard one of the presenters say, some accountability in curriculum and what that needs to look like, and to center the experiences of our children. And really it required, as an administrator, a collective mindset. There is wisdom in this room beyond mine, absolutely, and some humility, and something that we don't speak on often when we think about curricular shift and we think about interrupting patterns. We have to be able to mourn loss too, because we as educators have been committed to things for long periods of time. I heard multiple of the presenters today speak about sort of some of that grief that comes when you realize, oh, I could have done this, or, oh, when I think about this child, I could have done this. Like, to be able to give each other and ourselves space to mourn that loss, to feel those feelings, and then to be able to let that go so we can move forward in positive ways towards change. We have to be able to embrace those things and build those habits. And I appreciate so much the conversation around resiliency, because that requires resiliency in our educators. It requires care for them and commitment to them when we think about that. And then the last couple of things, we think about training, collaboration, and feedback. But I also want to give a shout out to all my parents out there of your children. The number one thing that I have learned is this: your child will feel about their brain and their style about reading or any other intellectual pursuit the way that they hear and see reflected in you. when you have the opportunity to speak life, and we heard that in multiple ways too, into your young person, to fight on their behalf, to say, I see your brilliance and I refuse to stand in the room and allow anyone else to dim it. That is an incredible, powerful position that then, no matter what your child's profile is, gives them some stamina and some resilience and some sense of their own brilliance to be able to withstand whatever comes their way. We have had so many conversations in our household with our middle daughter around dyslexia, around what that looks like, such that she'll just declare, she's like, oh, that's my dyslexia again. Not with, oh, that's my dyslexia again, but like, that's a part of the unique things that make me me. And the more that I know about it, the more that I can walk in my own power around it. And I just encourage families to call teachers into account for that as well. That is what teachers need to be doing, is reflecting their brilliance. Dyslexia is a way that a brain processes information. It is not the whole entirety of that young person. And it has absolutely nothing to do with their intellectual prowess or their brilliance. And we need to hold that for our students and require that of our educators. That's a piece of the work that we have been working toward at KairosPDX. And I will stop there. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little of our journey. Thank you so much to all of the fabulous speakers who brought life to me today to help me to think more critically about how I do this work. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Mr. Kareem.
I'll be quick, but Zalika, thank you for that. And I'd ask you, I'll give you a few moments of my time to just share with everybody what curriculum you all are using. I know there's interest in that. I saw somebody in the chat say, we'll get it to you later, but I know how that is when you really want to know something. So would you mind sharing that with the folks?
Absolutely. So what we did is we adapted Orton Gillingham, which is a curriculum that's often used for students. It's often used in a one-on-one setting, again, thinking about how we take privilege and turn that up on top of itself, right, for those students who can afford it. And we've trained all of our K2 educators in the Orton Gillingham program. So that's the program to which I was referring. We're also, as a whole school, moving toward EL curriculum, but that's a whole nother conversation. But that's the one that I was referring to. Thanks for giving me a moment to answer the question.
No problem. I get it. And part of our work with Oakland's NAACP is making sure that professional development is available to everyone and that there are different, that they have a portfolio of options. There's some asynchronous trainings that you can take, 7 to 10 week classes, pretty intense. You get graduate level credits through groups like CORE. And then there's things like the Reading League, where you can, do it a la carte. 2.5 hour blocks where you select what you feel best fits your need. There are all letters training is another one, Orton Gillingham training, Holy Names University does it, others do it as well. So professional development is key. There are other curriculums like that. EL education is a good one. I might as well go in right here. EL is a good one. It's very complex. It's very complex. They're trying to streamline it to make it more efficient. There's a slide version. They have a couple of publishers. But if you're going to use the slides, use Model Detroit. It's free, does the same thing. But they're really working on creating a flex one. You've also got bookworms. If you're focusing on K2, you really just want to start with K2 strong, you can look at Super Kids, but they only go K2. They specialize with that. Then you've got CKLA or the core knowledge stuff. That's good, but if you're going to do CKLA, you should walk it up, implement it kindergarten, then first grade, then second grade. So the scaffolds are all there. There's some other ones, wit and wisdom, but you got to pair it with something else. So do your research, find out which ones have success, which ones are working with our kids, and make your choices there. Orton Gillingham training is always good. So let's see really quickly. My stuff is I'm a guy who I was truly blessed to, my mother found a school that worked for me. I didn't like it, but she insisted because she said, I'm not going to lose another son. And she insisted that I go to this school, and I did. I hated it, but it worked. And I went to Morehouse. That's a whole word right there. Parents, you got to do what's best for your kids. They're kids. You be the parent. They'll understand later, hopefully, but if they don't, they'll get over it. You got to make that call. I know their friends are there, their big siblings are there, but you got to make the call. I went to Morehouse, and my study partner was Ennis Cosby, Bill Cosby's son. He had dyslexia. He didn't know it. He didn't know what was going on with him, but all I knew was he was a terrible study partner, D's and F's. He just about flunked out. But then they sent him in some summer college program. I don't know where they went. About 10 to 15 brothers went out to this college, came back a new man, started getting A's and B's. I was like, man, what did they do? But that showed me that our people are capable. They just need the training, support, and to understand how they learn. He wanted to be a special ed teacher to support kids like himself. He was murdered, I don't know what year it was, 96, 7, something like that. And so I've kind of taken on that challenge. I just wanted to be a teacher in the hood where I grew up, but now I'm, did that for 15 years. Now I want to make sure I check that other box too. So that's why I'm in this. And have seen it up close and personal in my work as a classroom, both English only and serving bilingual kids. And so every year when I was a teacher, I would go to the principal and say, give me the two kids nobody else wants. And basically, there's the 2 Black boys that was turning the school upside down. And she said, no problem. Here you go. You want more? And so the reason why I did that because I'm a Black guy in the school. I was a pretty good teacher. I figured it's my job to just make it happen. And I knew how to do something I knew what other teachers couldn't do. Or I shouldn't say that. So there are lots of great teachers there. Some are very, very good. But I was able to connect with them on a different level, which was to say, and Zalika just named this. This is why I'm bringing this up. I would sit them down and say, Otis, Davon, Javon, DeMonte, Kelvin, Joshua, whomever, Keith, look, I know you can't read. I already know. But look, I'm gonna teach you how. I know how to teach you how to read. They look at me like I've heard, it's very skeptical. Because if you've made it to the 5th grade, I did this in, I taught a 4th grade combo classroom. And then later on, I taught high school special ed algebra. They looked at me skeptically, but we made a deal. But look, you can't cut up. I need you to, tighten up and fly right, man. I can't have nonsense in the class. You got to tighten up. But I'm going to teach you how to read, and I'm not going to give up on you. You have my word. Never had a problem. And they would say, oh, it's because you're a Black guy. You relate to Black kids. Maybe. All right. Okay, maybe. Sure. All right. But I think the bigger piece was they were like, man, somebody's going to teach me how to read. I don't have to. And I was like, look, you don't have to hide it. I'm not going to shame you. I know how it is in class. Teachers calling you randomly. I get all of that. Okay. But I'm going to be there for you, and I'm not going to give up on you till you learn how to read. And they took that deal every time. One of my godchildren, my godson Kelvin, he's now in his mid-30s. He was the one student that he learned to read, but it wasn't good enough. I stuck with him. Right? He's my son, and it drives me crazy sometimes, but through thick and thin, that's my dude. What I will say is coalition matters. And you have to, you're playing for high stakes. You have to leverage power. That means organizing on campus with parent communities, with civil rights groups, with folks around town who are willing and able to help. They may not know all the details of all of this, but we need you. This is a civil rights issue. So bring in the civil rights community. Go to your churches. Talk to the press. We've had countless, so I built our group has built a grassroots campaign with parent organizations, universities, nonprofits, and we move together. We move together. I mean, NAACP sometimes they're good to get you in the door, but to have a whole group moving in the same direction, that's powerful. Powerful. To go to the universities and have the school system say, look, this is what we need from your graduates. And if, we preference hiring for people who know the science of reading. That's power enacted on universities. To go to K-12 leadership and say, the people in charge from what we have discovered, the people in charge, they didn't learn the way most kids learn. So what are you going to do to make sure our kids get served? How are you going to make sure? Because the folks in charge, they're on some different stuff. I'm going to put a link in here to the chat for everybody. I gave that article and met with the leadership in every district, charter, etc. And I did what that article said right there. I asked them about the foundational skills. I asked them about the direct instruction, explicit instruction, however you want to name it. And I told one CEO and chief academic officer, by the way, one of them was Black. I said, if you don't provide direct instruction to students, it's our responsibility as a community to treat you like a crack house in the 80s. You can't play. And I knew them both. I would consider one to be, I'm not a friend, but I knew him. But you can't play. And I say allies because, you know, we often think in this martial literacy that Black folks got to stay with Black folks and white folks got to stay with white folks. I think that's a mistake. First of all, the reason why I partner, the NAACP partners with the decoding dyslexia community is because most of them are white, not all of them, but their children have a learning difference. Parents whose kids have learning differences, it's a whole different flow. That's like being Black. Because you know your kids are set upon in the system. There's no, the veneer of everybody's here to provide our child an excellent education, that veneer is gone. You don't believe the hype anymore. You looking at it, you realize it's on you. If you don't step up, your kids are gonna be set upon. So they're natural allies. They get it when you're trying to advocate for legislation or going to a school board or whatever else, man, soccer moms go hard. I mean, and I'm trying to tell you, and they need the civil rights folks to say, listen, this is a moral issue. You're dealing with this now. Guess what? We've been dealing with this for 300-400 years. So let's partner and get something done for our babies. You know, the folks in bilingual folks, hey, guess what? This is the same dynamic there. So anyway, I urge you to have those alliances. And the second thing is, oftentimes there seems to be some dissonance between, should we have culturally responsive curriculum or should we have structured literacy, scientific reading stuff? And it seemed like two separate camps. That's wrong. That's wrong. I was given a presentation yesterday to these state folks, 6 different states we're working with. And I said, think of it like this. Think of it like a car. The science of reading is the wheels on is the tires on the car. Now, if you don't have that, you're gonna be scraping down the road, sparks flying. You might get a little, but you're not gonna get far. And everybody's gonna be looking at you saying, Lord, have mercy. What are they doing? You're not gonna get far, right? You can go, but you know. And then the cultural relevancy is the gasoline. That provides the volition for folks to want to move, for kids to want to get up and do something. And it may not be Dr. King. It may be robots. You have to find what the child is interested in and connects to and identifies with, you know, and the curriculum you select. Here's key. The curriculum you select must allow the teachers the bandwidth they need to really get in there and sprinkle love on it. Your teachers need patience, diligence. They need to be able to research. They have to be able to organize groups. They have to do all the things that's not in the contract enough. But if they're so busy resting with 5 and 6 manuals, they be like, man, I'm giving all I got right now. What else you want me to do? Okay, so not only do you want to pick a curriculum that's scientifically based and evidence-based and has evidence of success, but the bandwidth has got to be there. The learning curve has got to be reasonable. I mean, let's just talk about it. You teachers, you know, anyway. So there's that, all right. And on top of that, in addition to the advocacy and the curriculum and all those type of things, in addition to educators being given permission to heal, I heard someone say that. That was prescient. That's absolutely true. By the way, that happens I think that happens at the top levels of systems. The leadership has to say, it was my fault, it was me. We had that curriculum in place. We made that curriculum choice. We got the PD the professional development that you learned. That's on us. They have to message it that way so that the teachers don't feel, because they're the front lines. the parents are looking at them like, didn't you know? What you mean you didn't have it? That you got to be able to say it's on us. If you don't do that, you're breaking the silent deal between teachers and administration. If you want loyal soldiers, you got to be able to take the blame when things go wrong. All right. So but then in addition to that, the parents, if you want to have a healing circle, you save it for the parents. I'm trying to tell you, when at the NAACP, when we have community meetings and we bring this topic up, it's not a dry eye in the room, because we've been told things for so long about our kids, and sadly, I hate to even. And sometimes we just so busy working and tired and everything. Sometimes we just start to believe, you hear your child is struggling enough. You get enough phone calls, you get enough notices or letters home. At a certain point in time, I got to go to work. Just can you hold it together? Don't make me lose my job. So parents need permission and time and leadership in terms of their own healing, collectively and as individuals, forgiving themselves for things they may have thought about their kids but will never admit. So there's a lot of healing in this space for Black families and all families. The ones who are the most vulnerable will be the ones who are the most effective leaders in this space. Whether it's teacher leaders, system leaders, parent leaders, you name it. I would advocate, I can go on, I know time is short, but I would advocate identifying allies cross-sector. And look, I understand it's important to have culture relevant pedagogy, but I don't care if Harriet Tubman is your crossing guard. If you don't have the science of reading, if you're not getting the foundational skills, that car's not going anywhere. You got to teach those babies. In the Latino culture, Spanish culture, they call it pobrecito culture. Ay, pobrecito. Oh, you poor thing. It's all right. Come on over here. Don't worry. Look, don't worry about that. Come on over here and sit down. You want something to eat? Ay, pobrecito. Poor thing. Man, there's a version of that in every culture. You can love a child. It's okay to love a child. We need love, but don't mistake. You got to get the skill. You got to go learn how to teach that child as you're loving them and infusing the cultural relevancy in there. If you don't provide the skills and the tools for them to climb out of that hole, you're going to leave them there and just think on that. Just think on that. Cultural relevancy is great. We need it. But whatever their affinity is, wonderful. And we have to invest in learning and have a learning culture in our school sites and in our systems so that we can actually acquire the skills that we need to serve our babies the way they need to serve. I'm done.
Thank you, Brother Kareem. Y'all, I think we need to do a part 2, but not today, not next month, but maybe in a couple months we'll circle back around, because this has just been amazing.